How can a superpower disappear so completely? It was once thought to be a myth. Imagine it, a kingdom so vast, so powerful, that it stood toe-to-toe with Egypt's pharaohs. Not as a vassal, as an equal. Its kings rode in cuneiform, struck deals with Ramses himself. Then silence. For nearly 3,000 years, not a whisper, not a grave, not a name, not even a ruin that anyone could trace. Just one word, Hittite. And that, only in the Bible, which most scholars dismissed as myth, fable, fiction wrapped in Bronze Age poetry. They said the Hittites never existed. They said they were invented. And for a long time that was enough. Until 1906, a team of German archaeologists stumbled into the highlands of central Turkey and uncovered the impossible. Massive stone gates, lion carvings, whole city walls sunken into the earth, and deeper still clay tablets, thousands of them, buried beneath the ruins of a forgotten capital. The name was there, again and again, Hattusa, the capital of an empire we'd erased from history, because we thought it was too extraordinary to be real. Can you imagine the weight of that discovery? For centuries, believers had been mocked, historians, theologians, anyone who dared say the Bible got this one right. And yet there it was, a city so advanced, so structured, it rivaled Babylon. A kingdom that had treaties, gods, and laws, all pressed into stone, hidden under centuries of dust. But if the rediscovery of Hattusa answered one question, it opened another. Because when scientists began to search for the people themselves, the ones who built this empire, who spoke this ancient tongue, they found almost nothing. No royal tombs, no golden sarcophagus, just fragments, bones, whispers. The Hittites had left behind an empire, but not their faces, not their blood, and that led to a mystery even stranger than their disappearance. Because when we finally found the bones, the ones buried beneath their ancient cities, their DNA told a story no one saw coming. They spoke the language of conquerors, but their blood told another story. The Hittites, rulers of a Bronze Age empire, wrote in the oldest Indo-European tongue we've ever found. A language that should have carried the same genetic echo as the others, Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, a whisper from the steppe. But the DNA didn't match. Every Indo-European branch across Europe and Asia carries a clear genetic scar, a Yamnaya imprint from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, dating back nearly 5,000 years. It's in the bones of warriors buried with carts, horses, and fire. It's in the Y chromosomes of kings and farmers alike. Except in Anatolia. The Hittites, for all their Indo-European roots, had none of it. No steppe ancestry. No Yamnaya blood. Just silence, where the signal should have been. It's a contradiction so sharp, so precise. It fractured the steppe hypothesis itself. Because if language spread with genes, who taught the Hittites how to speak? And it gets stranger. The Hittite language is missing something. Words for wheel, for chariot, for wagon. The very inventions that gave steppe warriors their deadly speed are absent from the tongue of a people who built a chariot empire. It's like hearing echoes of a song before the melody existed. Even their laws, etched into stone long before Roman codes, reveal a world rooted not in horses and conquest, but in treaties, God's land. These weren't wild horsemen. They were architects of order, of diplomacy. So what happened? How did a people with no trace of the steppe in their genes come to speak the first Indo-European language ever written? And if their words came before the wheel, before the wagons rolled across the steppe, then we have to ask, could the Hittites be older than the Yamnaya themselves? She was just a girl, buried in the earth of Sapinua, nameless, voiceless, forgotten for 35 centuries. No crown, no gold. Just a fractured skull and a femur still curled in the fetal hush of ancient soil. But in 2019, that silence broke. For over 100 years, we'd searched for Hittite tombs. We found cities, temples, archives of kings, but not the people themselves. No royal bones. No genetic mirror to hold up to history. And then her, a young woman, likely no more than 20. Found beneath a collapsed structure once lined with cuneiform tablets and scorched timber beams. Her bones charred by fire, but not erased. Scientists moved like surgeons. Every shard collected, every cell protected. because inside those brittle remains lay the first chance to hear the genome of a civilization long lost to myth. Not a myth anymore. What happens when a lost empire breathes again? Not through words, but through chromosomes. Her DNA was more than sequence. It was a signal, a transmission from a world before empires fell, a whisper that could finally answer the unspoken. Who were the Hittites? Did they ride in from distant lands, like ghosts across the Black Sea? Or were they the children of the soil Anatolia's own? Her body had no name, but her blood carried a story. And when they sequenced it, when they looked inside, what they found didn't match any legend. No steppe marker, no echo of the Yamnaya horse lords who spread fire and language across half the earth. Instead, her genome hummed with something stranger, older, a signal not from the north, but from the east. And with it a trail, one that didn't just lead to Hattusa, but reached far beyond, because buried in her bones was the key to rewriting where Indo-Europeans truly began. For decades, scientists stared at the puzzle, and one piece refused to fit. The Hittites spoke Indo-European, but their DNA carried no trace of the steppes, none of the fire-branded markers from the Yamnaya migrations that reshaped half of Eurasia. No signal, no footprint, just absence. And then something whispered from the dust. Deep inside the genome of that Anatolian girl, and others like her, researchers found a sliver of ancestry no one expected. Faint but distinct. A ghost in the genome. It didn't point west. It didn't come from the Balkans or the Danube valleys. It came from the east, from a place older than empire, older even than the steppe migrations themselves, a corridor between the Caucasus Mountains and the lower Volga River. The scientists called them the CLV people, the missing link, a shadow population, hidden in the genetic noise, until the technology caught up. And when they traced it backwards, the shock landed like thunder, because the Yamnaya, the feared horsemen of the steppe, the very carriers of Proto-Indo-European speech, weren't the beginning. They were the branch. The root was CLV. This ancient group didn't just predate the steppe migrations, they made them possible. They passed on their genes, their customs, their dead. Burial mounds from the Caucasus highlands to central Anatolia echo the same silence, bodies curled the same way, red ochre smeared over skulls, pottery lined with motifs that look eerily familiar. The ghost had a culture. It had a path. It had already moved, long before the steppe exploded. And that's the revelation that turns the whole story inside out. Because if the Hittites carried CLV ancestry, and not Yamnaya, then maybe it wasn't the steppe that brought Indo-European to Anatolia. Maybe something else did. So the question is no longer, where did they go? The real question is, who got there first? It wasn't the warriors who carried the language, not the men buried with daggers and wheels, not the chieftains laid to rest beneath towering mounds, crowned in bronze and silence. It was the women. When scientists cracked the genetic code of the ancient steppe, the Yamnaya, they found something strange, a sharp imbalance. Almost all the paternal lines traced back to a handful of dominant men, R1b, R1a. Again and again, a male bottleneck so extreme, it looked like conquest. But the maternal side, the mitochondrial DNA, told a different story. It wasn't from the steppe. It came from the south, from the shadowy forests and highland valleys of the Caucasus, lower Volga. The CLV people, the ghost ancestors, they were the mothers, and in their blood, in their bones, something more than genes survived. Language, because while Yamnaya men roamed, expanding across continents with wagons and fire, they weren't always there to raise their children. They fathered the next generation, but they didn't raise them. That role fell to the women, the CLV wives, concubines, captives, and maybe, just maybe storytellers. In homes built of hide and thatch, they sang lullabies in a tongue no steppe warrior knew. They told myths, not of horses and wheels, but of rivers, mountain gods, and sacred stones. And as their children grew, those sounds shaped their minds. Fathers left the bloodline, but mothers left the voice. It wasn't conquest that spread Proto-Indo-European. Not entirely. It was breath, ritual, memory, spoken by women who had no armies, no crowns, no names. And when that language reached Anatolia, It had already shifted, already carried echoes of other places, other gods, other mothers. So the next time we say Indo-European, we shouldn't picture a man on a chariot. We should imagine a whisper in the dark from a woman whose name is long forgotten. Because what if PI wasn't spread by warriors, but whispered by mothers? The steppe was supposed to be the origin, the roaring forge of language and blood. For decades, we followed the Yamnaya trail like a gospel, horsemen charging west, carrying a tongue that would become Sanskrit, Latin, English civilization itself. And yet, in Anatolia, that trail goes cold. No R1B, no Yamnaya signal, not even a whisper of the Great Migration. Instead, the strange silence. This land, once called the birthplace of Indo-European, turns out to be its genetic dead end. The steppe never reached here. Not in numbers, not in blood. It's like finding the echo without ever hearing the sound. And here's the twist. The Hittites, the first Indo-European speakers we can actually read, ruled over cultures they didn't replace. They absorbed the Hattians. They borrowed the gods of the Hurrians. They stitched foreign rituals into their own royal prayers. This wasn't conquest. It was fusion. The steppes didn't birth the Hittites. They followed them. Because now, the evidence flips everything. The Yamnaya weren't the origin of Indo-European. They were the second wave. The first had already passed through. Quietly. Through women, through trade, through ancient roots planted by the CLV people before the steppes ever stirred. And the language the Hittites spoke? It wasn't a branch grown from a tree. It was the trunk. The protoform. Older. Simpler. Closer to the root than anything that came after. We thought they were the end. But they might have been the beginning. Which means the entire map of Indo-European spread needs to be redrawn. And that means Hittite wasn't just the first branch. It was the lost blueprint. Before Babel, there was Hittite. Not the last echo of a dying tongue, but the first whisper of a language that would shape half the world. For centuries, linguists dismissed it as crude, primitive, stripped down, as if it sat too low on the tree to matter. But they had it backwards. The simplicity was the clue. Hittite wasn't broken, it was original. The raw clay from which everything else was shaped. It's the language that still remembers a time before the word four-wheel existed, before the horse had become myth, before conquest gave grammar its violence. And inside that language, gods still linger. Tirana, storm lord of the Hittites, carries the same lightning as Zeus, the same thunder as Thor. Not copies, not borrowings, echoes, fragments of the same divine ancestor, scattered across time. But this kingdom wasn't like the empires that came after. It didn't erase. It absorbed. Hittite kings prayed in four languages. Their temples housed foreign idols beside native ones. Laws were translated, not imposed. Tolerance, in a Bronze Age world that knew only fire and sword. And yet they vanished. The Hittites didn't just lose a war, they dissolved. Their language faded. Their cities burned. Their memories scattered into myth. But now we know. We were reading their words backwards. What we thought was the edge was the center. They didn't descend from Indo-European. They were Indo-European. The first spark. The root syllables that later grew into Vedic chants, Latin poetry, and English dreams. And if their voice was the original, then the people who spoke it, the ones who carried it into Anatolia, were the founders of something far bigger than we ever imagined. But what happened to this proto-people before they vanished? They didn't come the way we thought. No waves crashing west from the steppe. No roaring flood of chariots through the Balkans. Instead, they moved like shadows, counterclockwise, silent, east to west, tracing a forgotten arc around the Black Sea. It's not a migration anyone mapped in the textbooks. But the genomes say otherwise. From the highlands of the Caucasus through Armenia, slipping through the narrow passes of eastern Anatolia. They left fingerprints in places no migration theory had marked, and artifacts where no conquest was expected. In the marshy basin of ancient Istanbul, archaeologists found statues, narrow-faced, almond-eyed, staring with expressions no local god ever wore. Beside them, tin objects that didn't belong. Tin that had traveled. From the east. From mountains far beyond. These were not invaders. Not settlers. Not conquerors. They were something stranger. Messengers, refugees, whisperers, and the trail they left is as broken as it is deliberate. Hints in pottery, shadows and burial rites, a handful of bone fragments that tell of bodies moving, but not where we looked. Why bypass the Balkans? Why avoid the open plains where horses ruled? What secret did they carry that needed hiding? Because this wasn't a detour. It was a corridor, carved by intent, not chance. And every time the geneticists think they've pinned down the route, another site opens. Another anomaly appears. A northern Syrian village, with Anatolian motifs, carved in foreign stone. An Armenian skeleton, with just a trace of CLV ancestry, staring back across the centuries. This isn't just a migration. It's a vanishing act in reverse. Not disappearing from history, but slipping into it before anyone noticed. So if they reached Anatolia by this path, far earlier, far quieter, then the maps we've trusted need rewriting. But the deeper question is, wherever they passed through, did they leave behind more than just bones? The fires came fast. By 1200 BCE, the great gates of Hattusa, once guarded by lions carved in stone, were splintered. The empire that had signed treaties with pharaohs gone, its temples looted, its archives crushed beneath ash. And just like that, the Hittites vanished. No last stand, no great tomb, just silence. For centuries, it looked like history had swallowed them whole. But history doesn't erase everything. Somewhere in central Anatolia, a farmer tills soil once trodden by Hittite priests. In southern Italy, bones buried beneath a Roman villa carry a whisper of Anatolian ancestry. Geneticists ran the tests, compared the codes, and the signal was still there. Not in names, not in memory, in blood. How does identity survive when no one remembers it? How does a people's story continue when even their own descendants don't know it began? We often think of legacy in monuments, in myths carved into marble. But the truth is quieter, stranger. It lives in the double helix, in the unspoken, in the crowd that walks beneath modern Istanbul, not knowing their cells still carry echoes of a Bronze Age kingdom. You might be descended from the forgotten, not the emperors who ruled with iron, but the children who fled with nothing and passed on a story without words. And maybe that's the deeper mystery. If a people's history can vanish from books, from ruins, from rituals, and still live on in flesh, then what else have we inherited without knowing? Because Hattusa may have burned, but the Hittites, they didn't vanish. Not entirely. And this isn't where their story ends. Who owns the past? Is it the archaeologist, brushing dust from a broken seal? The linguist, tracing forgotten verbs back to their roots? Or the geneticist, staring into strands of ancient code, searching for ghosts? Each field claims a corner of truth. But when they disagree, when DNA says one thing and language says another, which voice do we trust? This is the scholar's dilemma. Because behind every discovery is a decision. Which data to follow, which model to believe, and which stories to resurrect. But there's more at stake than just accuracy. When researchers traced the Indo-European languages back to the steppes, some celebrated, others recoiled, because the last time someone mapped that spread, they twisted it. Nazi theorists turned Aryan into a weapon. A linguistic family became a racial fantasy. That shadow still lingers. Even now, every new paper risks being misread, reposted, repurposed, claimed by voices it never meant to serve. So what do you do when a scientific truth might awaken an ideological lie? And what happens when your data says your ancestors came from somewhere you never expected? From a people your culture never claimed? Are you still you? Are we our genomes, cold lines of ancestry and drift? Are we the languages we speak, the prayers we inherit, or the stories we choose to believe? Because every test, every sequence, every excavation isn't just about the past. It's about identity. Who gets to tell it? Who gets to own it? And who gets left behind when history is redrawn? One wrong frame, one careless headline, and a 3,000-year-old whisper becomes a battleground. So we have to ask, not just what the data says, but what it means. And in the next discovery, whose identity will be rewritten? The past isn't behind us. It's under our skin. We carry it, not in memory, but in marrow, in the quiet loops of our DNA, where names fade but patterns remain. Right now, in a lab lit by soft blue screens and silence, new genomes are being sequenced. From forgotten graves, from bones exhumed in Anatolia, never meant to speak again. And yet, they are speaking. Every chromosome a message, every strand a thread. Somewhere in that code may live the echo of a child born in Hattusa, a girl who once walked between the lion gates, who prayed in the temple of Tirana, whose voice has been gone for 30 centuries, but whose blood might still ripple in you. That's what this work reveals. Not just empires lost, but people, real people, who were never meant to be remembered and yet somehow are. And it's only the beginning, because next we follow the language of fire, to the east, to the origin of Indo-Iranian speech, into lands once ruled by Mitanni kings and Vedic priests, into deserts where horses were sacred and words moved faster than armies. Another migration, another silence to break, another identity waiting to be rewritten. If you're fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe for more untold stories, because the next genome is already speaking.